Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Kristen Donnelly, one of the good doctors of Abbey Research. And here at Abbey Research, we are deep believers that curiosity can change the world. And the reason we say that is because everyone changes their minds throughout their lives. We do it all the time, but most of the time we do it through relationships and stories. And the beginning point of relationships and stories always starts with curiosity. And there's a lot of things in the world right now that need a little bit of fixing. I think we can all agree. And we're passionate about helping people be the fullest versions of human that they can be as we kind of make a fuller world as well. And so a big part of our work at Abbey Research in doing that is this series. It's called Welcome to My World, in the premise that everybody has something in their lives the rest of us could know more about that would help us grow as humans and have a fuller understanding of the human experience. I get to talk to fascinating and wise people from all over the world, and you get to eavesdrop. And today is no exception. I am joined by somebody who's one of my personal heroes, which I'm sure she would blush at, but it's very, very true. Kellie Turtle is a PhD researcher at the University of Ulster in Belfast, Northern Ireland. She's working within the discipline of social policy. Her research examines the development of progressive faith discourse on abortion and its impact on abortion law and policy. For folks who are not familiar, the law and policy around abortion in Northern Ireland is very, very specific, and I'm sure we'll get into that later with Kellie. She holds an MA from Queen's University Belfast in gender and society. For anyone who hasn't joined us before, Queen's is where Dr. Aaron and I both have our PhDs from. So we are all alumna going on here. She's also an experienced organizer and a campaigner within the feminist movement in Northern Ireland and has worked in community development and human rights education. Kellie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
So much fun. So that's a really full bio. And I have been watching your career for 10 odd years, and I know that barely scratches the surface. So where I would love to start, though, is kind of, I guess, why abortion politics? Why is that the thing that you're currently working on?
I have been involved in the pro-choice movement here in Northern Ireland for just over 10 years. When I started to get interested in feminism as a young woman, as a student, going out into the world and discovering all of the many ways that gender equality has not yet been achieved, you can't really do that in Ireland, North or South, without dealing with the abortion issue. And that's because it's been so heavily restricted here for so many years that it was having a huge effect on women's lives in a real way. I mean, in Northern Ireland, you just could not access abortion unless it was an extreme case, unless the woman's life was in danger, or if you could demonstrate there would be a severe long-term impact on your physical or mental health. And that ground was so difficult to prove, and doctors were so afraid of criminalization that it was extremely rare you would be able to access abortion on those grounds. So really, we had a situation where abortion was being exported across the water to England, where the law is much more liberal. So I've always been involved in lobbying to change those laws. There's always been a really vibrant pro-choice community here, and I think it's really a powerful movement because it is rooted so much in the reality of what criminalizing abortion actually looks like. I know in the States you have to go back decades to really feel the impact of that criminalization, although I know issues around access are still very pertinent today. And that's what we were dealing with, people having to actually leave their country to access an abortion. And of course there was the whole inequality around that. People with money in Northern Ireland have always been able to access abortion by traveling. People without finances are the ones who are hardest hit. So for me, it was a social justice issue as well. So I'd done that work for years, as I said, and then about 4 years ago, I needed to access an abortion myself. And that just brought that issue obviously home to me in a huge way. I realized that despite being an advocate for it for a number of years, I didn't know what to do. I had to call up friends of mine in England who run abortion funds and abortion support networks and say, hi, what do I actually do? How do I get there? What clinics should I go to? Am I going to need a hotel room? And I had some lovely friends who were able to sit me down and walk me through it. But it just really brought it home to me what people have been going through for years just to access that basic healthcare. So it's fair to say that since my personal experience, it has ramped up my activism massively, but it also connected it with all the other parts of my life. So I think for a long time, my feminism sat in one box and my faith, for example, sat in another box. And when it's happening to you, you can't do that. It all collides, it all comes together, because in the reproductive decision that I had to make, and all the other reproductive decisions that go with all the other aspects of my life as a mom and all of that, my faith was important to me in that. So I think that was really the start of my journey that I've been on for the last few years, which has been to try and engage faith communities, the communities that I come from, in a different conversation about abortion. And we did change the law, I have to say. We did it. We, after years and years of decades of campaigning, abortion was decriminalized here just about 2 years ago. And then 1 year ago, we had regulations passed through the Westminster government in London that would bring us in line with the rest of the UK. Now, sadly, we haven't had those implemented fully. There haven't been statutory abortion services commission, because we have a health minister who doesn't think that it's his job to do that. But that threat of criminalisation is gone, and we have some wonderful doctors in the health service here who are providing services, even though they're not being funded for it, even though they're having to find the time out of their own schedules to do that. They're doing their best, and people can now access limited abortion services here in Northern Ireland.
Which I just want to, as an outsider who has lived in Northern Ireland, I want to underscore the kind of incredibleness of that for my viewers. Like I grew up in America, obviously accent high, but I got married in Northern Ireland, and that's where a lot of the conversations came really home really quickly, where that was not, I've never wanted children. And so if that became, if I became pregnant, it would have been a crisis pregnancy, no matter what. And when we were living in Northern Ireland, having to explain to my family, like, this is what would happen if I made this choice. And that my friends and family, they were aghast, because they couldn't quite imagine that in 2014, that this was a reality in a country. And I was like, it is for a lot of women who, I have the money where I could pay. I could fly back to America, for crying out loud, and, recover in my mom's house. But it was the amount of relief, like I could feel it among my friends and family back in Northern Ireland when the decriminalization happened, especially because when I was there was an issue of roommates actually turning in their roommate because she had accessed, I think, drugs over the internet, pills over the internet. They found the evidence in the trash, and then they turned her in. Like, this was a thing that happened in our lifetime.
Yeah. I don't know how easy it is to access in the US, but if anybody wanted to know a little bit about the reality of the last, sort of lot of years that we've lived through here, there was a BBC drama series called Three Families that was aired very recently. And it just followed, its storytelling. It's exactly what you do, Kristen. And I know two of the three women depicted in it. And I know that they depicted their stories as accurately as I have ever seen a drama deal with real life stories. And it's recommended viewing, to be honest, for anybody who wants to understand just the cruelty of a state removing that option from people and criminalizing people. One of the women in that drama series was prosecuted for getting abortion pills for her daughter, who had been raped and was in an abusive relationship, but her daughter was only 15 years old. And the child was pulled out of school by the police and interviewed, and the woman was dragged through the courts for 5 years just for trying to do the right thing by her child. And I think those were horrific experiences, but those were the catalyst for change. When people saw on their evening news the reality of criminalizing abortion and what it does to families and the suffering that it causes, we couldn't remain in the status quo. And the politicians gradually started to change their minds because people were actually challenging them about it on the doorsteps when they were going looking for votes. And here we are. I mean, I would, like yourself, when I started this work over 10 years ago, I would not I didn't really believe it was going to happen in my lifetime, to be quite honest with you.
It was,
and yet here we are.
A breath of fresh air, I think. And we need to also acknowledge that there was momentum coming from the Republic as well. The law was changed in the
Absolutely.
Republic, and that helped a lot of, and also once that law was changed, it freed up a lot of activists from the South to be able to help put more pressure on the North. And there was a lot of Northern activists involved in the South as well. And the movement of people has never quite been prevented, despite despite any political decisions too. People have always moved across the border. But I want to return really briefly to what you said about your faith, because for folks who aren't aware, Northern Ireland, while not an officially Christian nation, is a very Christianized nation. And it is very acceptable for leading politicians to cite their faith as reasons for voting, in a way that when it happens in the US, they get mocked a little bit, because like we have constitutional protections of separation of church and state, which do not exist in the United Kingdom for a host of reasons, including that they have a state church. So one of the reasons for the criminalization of abortion for a long time was the faith systems of both Catholic and Protestant politicians. And so one of the things that really has emerged from my study of the last 10 years, and please correct me, Kellie, if you know differently, is that more and more people of faith have been loud about why their faith actually informs them being pro-choice.
Well, it's definitely, there has been an increasing liberalization of faith communities here. Until we started this work in the past year or so, abortion has never been visibly on the agenda. And that's what I and a few colleagues set out to change.
Okay.
There's been huge progress made on LGBT rights and equality, and we have a number of church denominations now that are fully inclusive and, you know, come out to Pride and take part in same-sex marriage ceremonies, you know, so massive progress there. And we owe a lot to the LGBT campaigners within the faith communities who have achieved that. Because it also helps move progress on for conversations about reproductive rights. We couldn't be having these conversations about reproductive rights if that work hadn't been done to just change people's thinking and, again, tell stories, humanize things. But I've been studying this, as obviously my heavily academic bio that I sent you, which
I mean, it's not like mine is less academic. So I think you're among friends here.
I think it's the imposter syndrome of suddenly being in academia after 10 years out of it. And I feel the need to like put it out there. But it is the topic of my PhD, trying to examine what a liberal and progressive narrative on abortion looks like when it's articulated from within a faith context. And I'm fascinated by the legacy of that in the United States.
Yeah.
Where there's been obviously decades and decades, the Clergy Consultation Service on Abortion, who organised safe access to abortion for women in the 60s and 70s, Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, Catholics for Choice. I'm studying all of what's happened over the years in America and trying to educate, in particular, evangelical Christians over here about that legacy, because what we've had in Northern Ireland has been a kind of exported pro-life narrative from the American religious right that you know, people have in the evangelical churches in particular have just kind of taken on. And one thing is probably really important for people to understand, when you look at the Protestant churches here, there isn't really a mainline Protestant tradition the way you would have in the States. Everybody is evangelical. Every denomination is evangelical.
Yeah, even when we pretend, I think like maybe there's pieces of the Church of Ireland that might be the closest, but people would still not recognize it as American Anglican. It wouldn't fit right. Yeah.
Well, I think there are individuals and congregations, the people who attend those churches, like me and many others, are, you know, all shades of liberal and progressive, but the leadership is extremely shut down and very evangelical in its thinking. Just this week, yesterday actually, the Church of Ireland at its annual synod meeting adopted a resolution on abortion, which was the resolution basically said, we reject this new law. They called it this extreme abortion law that's been imposed by Westminster.
Okay.
So, you know, that's the tradition that I come from. Church of Ireland is where I came to faith. And yeah, like yourself, I always kind of felt that's where there was maybe some humanity and like a
I'm
more
glad you
liberal
corrected me.
understanding of the world.
That's not been my experience with the Church of Ireland. So I'm glad to have been corrected. Thank you for that. Yeah.
And in the Presbyterian Church in Northern Ireland over the last, certainly in the last 5 years, if not a bit more, has moved very strongly to the right. They've passed some awful resolutions on LGBT inclusion. They no longer baptize the children of LGBT couples, which was a particularly, that just feels vindictive to me. I can't really understand as a person of faith how you
deny a sacrament to somebody
children
based on their parents. Yeah, that's.
And I know there's a debate in the States right now about President Biden and whether or not the Catholic Church should sanction him for his support of abortion, of legal access to abortion. So I get that that's a conversation that happens everywhere, but we're trying to speak into that very conservative evangelical culture. And it has taken a year of working with faith leaders. We didn't go to the gatekeepers because I feel like if you go to the gatekeepers who have a lot of power and need, a lot of that is invested in maintaining the status quo, they'll just shut those conversations down. So I went to people that I've known for years who are open-minded, progressive people who've been involved in some of the really hard conversations around the conflict here, who know how to get into a room where there are difficult issues and really listen. And we've had some incredible experiences. The first meeting was March, just before the pandemic hit. We all went away to a beautiful retreat centre in the mountains, which, as you know, everybody in Ireland loves to go to a retreat centre in the mountains.
As long as there was like a hill, some sheep, and a river, you guys are like going to change the world. It's the best. I love it.
Sitting around a fire with a bottle of whiskey. That's
exactly, and a whole lot of jammy Dodgers. Yeah.
So we spent a couple of days doing that, and it was incredible. It was honest, it was raw. For someone like me who's been on the pro-choice side of things for many years, it was difficult. I heard things that felt stigmatizing, but I had to sit with that and understand where people were coming from. For people on the kind of religious side of things who aren't familiar with the pro-choice arguments, they heard things that really challenged them. So it was a fantastic experience, and it really laid the base for what we're doing now. So a year and a bit later, we're now going public with this group. It's called Faith Voices for Reproductive Justice. We've written to the health minister to let him know that we're here, we exist. People of faith support him in implementing the new abortion law. And we want to engage. We want to engage with churches like the Church of Ireland, who just put this statement out. So next thing we want to do is say, let's talk about this. What's the alternative? What does this mean? And one thing that has really inspired me about this group is I went into it very advocacy focused. I wanted to see if we could have this public voice, and we have gotten to that stage now. But what they wanted to do initially was pastoral, and that has really actually ended up having such an impact on me as well. Having been through abortion and having never really had anywhere where I can work that out in a faith community, we now have that. They're such incredibly pastorally minded people. We used our American connections because we had the organization Faith Allowed, who are based in the States. They delivered training for us over Zoom in how to be faith-based peer listeners for people facing pregnancy crisis. And that was amazing, and just skilled us up so much to have the language to talk to people who are going through that experience and who want a faith-based support and listening ear, and someone to just ask all those tough questions to, like, will God forgive me? What does God think of me? And just always, Faith Aloud just taught us to always come back with that underlying message that God is love. And it's been incredibly powerful for me. It's been transformative and healing in lots of ways. And it enabled me to go on the radio, our main radio station here, BBC Radio Ulster. I got to go on the radio a few weeks ago and say to everybody who was listening out there, if you've had an abortion, God doesn't condemn you. You stand in the light of his grace and his love and his understanding. And I'm just having these experiences where all the parts of my life are colliding. It's brought me actually back closer to my faith in many ways through doing this work. So sometimes.
You mentioned that to me in a quick Facebook message as we were talking about doing this, and I was so intrigued to hear how, because you're actually not my only contact who has had a similar story, that once they made the decision to terminate a pregnancy, that their need to find some sort of space to talk about it actually brought them back to faith. They found a faith community that was allowed them to explore that in some way. And considering the legacy that we have as people of faith on the other side of the conversation, it always makes me really like giggly in joy that we can also be embodied love in this way. And I want to highlight for folks what Kellie talked about, in that everybody in that room had something that made them uncomfortable. And yet they all still committed to hear each other and to listen to each other. And that's really what makes it work. And that's over every topic. And when Dr. Aaron and I talk about the things that Northern Ireland can teach all of us, the ability to sit with people you disagree with is one of the things that Northern Ireland is very good at. That the legacy of, like you said, you bring the people who had some of this training from the conflict. Is really, really lovely. And so just for folks who are coming to this video through my work that don't know Northern Ireland as well, I wanted to highlight that stuff. But it's such a holy story. I just can't stop grinning legitimately. It just makes me so happy. And I used to listen to that show on Radio Ulster on a regular basis. So I can't imagine what it would have felt like for somebody cleaning dishes to hear that probably for the first time, that explicitly and that lovely. So what's next for the organization, for yourself? Obviously PhD research, which means like a level of self-masochism that I was lighting candles for you for, because I've been there. But where are you guys, now that you've done the kind of public, are you moving in more of an advocacy space? Are you trying to hold the pastoral spaces? What's the feeling?
I think there are people within the group who want to do both. There's different people who are suited to different aspects of it. And we're partnering with a brilliant organization here called Left Side Up, which is a progressive Christian theology, I guess, space. They're still working out what they are. They're very new. And they're doing, they're trying to do alternative theology in terms of training and book groups, but they're also trying to build a really strong supportive community. And they're focusing in on faith and mental health. And as part of that, the long-term plan for us is that we would offer peer support for people who have abortion experience and who want to talk about that in an affirming, non-judgmental faith space. So kind of see that in maybe this time next year, we'll have some peer support groups set up there where people can meet. It has been hard in the pandemic because you haven't been able to meet in physical spaces. And some of this stuff is just not really something you're going to open up about in a Zoom group or something like that. So we didn't rush it, but that's where we're heading. And we'll continue with the advocacy stuff. I think the fact that the legal issues are settled here gives us so much space to have really interesting conversations. Whenever you're fighting to change a law, it's very combative. You have to distill your messages down into things that don't always necessarily even sit right with yourself. And I've been in that space for 10 years. And to be honest, it was really burning me out. And I'm delighted with this change of pace into, those challenging conversations where the goal is to build relationships. If the goal is to change somebody's mind, that's exhausting. But when we're just building relationships and trying to find shared values, I'm so fired up about that. It's like I'm starting something brand new all over again. So that's where we're going with that. And then for me personally, if my ethical approval goes through with the university, which I'm now in my second attempt, I'm hoping it's like your driver's test and you kind of have to fail the first time so that the second time is better.
I failed my first differentiation and then I got my second. So living testimony, it happens.
if they approve my ethical proposal, I should be starting to interview people really soon about just I'm just going to be looking to interview people of all faith backgrounds who take a view on abortion that is more liberal than the dominant sort of faith or religious viewpoint here. And I am so excited about going out and meeting people individually and having those conversations and being a story keeper for them to be able to actually articulate their experiences that have been hidden forever, because really there has never been a space to say these things. And I should stress as well, like, we have people in the group that cannot be public about this because they would lose their jobs. Clergy members who would lose their jobs and their homes if the hierarchy didn't like what they were saying. So it's still quite a tense situation for some people to be involved in this. We've got others who don't have that hanging over them, so they're able to be much more public about it. But with my interviews, everything will be completely anonymized and confidential. So I'm looking forward to being able to then just amplify the voices of people who've had abortions, who sat in churches for years, never been able to tell anyone in their faith community. The only message that's ever come from certainly Christian churches here, whether Catholic or Protestant, is either outright condemnation of abortion or complete silence. There's never really been any alternative. So that's what we're trying to speak into that space and just say, like, this is the reality, and I do want to keep that pastoral focus, because I've always cared about breaking down the stigma. Even before we started doing this work with faith communities, the last big rally we had, we would have an annual march for choice every year when we were trying to change the law. And the last one we had, before the law finally did change, I spoke on the stage at the end of it and got everyone to hold hands with somebody around them and put their hands up in the air and just make this big interconnected mass. And I was just like, everyone in this place right now is holding the hand of someone who's had an abortion, directly or indirectly. And for me, it's always been about building that solidarity, breaking that stigma, saying we have nothing to be ashamed of. And I'm just carrying that into the faith space. And it's hard in that space because already I've got multiple people on social media telling me I'm not a Christian, this is evil, this is, the only way to be in God's love if you had an abortion is to repent. And I just don't believe that to be true, because women and other pregnant people make these decisions every day with the full moral weight of all of that comes into a decision like that, and everything that's going on in your life and everybody else that you're responsible for. So that's what I'm going to just keep on trying to do through my studies, but also through this advocacy work with Faith Voices for Reproductive Justice.
I am so excited to see where both go. A lot of my PhD research was holding space for people who, if their names got out, they would lose their job as well, just in the more queer spaces. And so that is, that's a holy responsibility I can empathize with. And I know, like, my posture going into it was one of privilege and also a little bit of fear and trembling, like, let me hold this well. And so I know that you will never be anything but responsible and kind with those stories. So as a fellow academic who needs that data, and then as a human person, I'm really excited about your work, and that you're the one who's going to kind of birth this out in this time. So I'm really, really excited for that. And then of course my I love Northern Ireland brain is going like, oh my God, when's their next thing? Can I be there? How can I help? What's going on? And bringing my little American golden retriever, like puppy dog excitement to it. This is so.
We would love to have you.
Oh, honestly, as soon as that lockdown's lifted, man, like as soon as y'all figure out how long I have to quarantine for, I'm coming back. This is the longest I've been away since the first time I went to Northern Ireland, and like, I'm itchy. So it's time to come home. And my poor husband we haven't seen his family at this point. We're hitting 2 years.
Wow.
And it's time there's babies born. We haven't met yet. Like, it's time to hug some people. So we're ready to come home. But before Kellie and I go on a tangent about what we're going to do and how many times I'm going to go to Maggie Mae's the next time I come back to Belfast.
Best friend, Belfast.
Oh my gosh, if you guys have liked this video, honestly, any part of our conversation, I would really appreciate a thumbs up there. It seems really dumb, but the YouTube algorithm really likes it. And if you are a fan of conversations and different points of view, then you're gonna love the rest of our channel. So if you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so that you never miss a video, we have conversations about everything in this series on reproductive justice to the Japanese gaming culture and what it says about being human. And then we have other series as well that talk about other parts of humanity. How do we talk about colonization? How do we wrestle with words we don't use anymore? These are all things that we're interested in talking about. You can also get a hold of Faith Voices for Reproductive Justice. The information is below. It's mostly a Twitter space this moment. And I'll be honest, a lot of Northern Ireland justice is on Twitter. So if you're not there and you're interested, make sure you get a Twitter account. It's a great follows. And then watch this space as well, because as we find out more about what the organization is doing, we'll be talking about it on our channel as well. So we can't wait. Kellie, thank you again for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to talk to you about all this. It's great to have a space to process it all with someone like you who knows this place so well and has been through all the ups and downs of trying to work for change in Northern Ireland.
God, love it. It just does its best sometimes to not change. It's just oh God, but oh yes, we love it. It's our pleasure as always. So everybody, again, thanks for joining us, and I will see you next time on Welcome to My World.